This is what I got wrong about conditioning for combat sports. So when I first started working with fighters, I thought that most of them were just missing a strong aerobic base and that their sparring work would be enough to take care of, any higher intensity cardio work that they needed. And I do still partially agree with both of those statements to an extent, but there are a couple of elements that I've changed my approach on, and it's resulted in better outcomes in terms of better conditioning for my athletes. So first of all, while I do think high volumes of zone 2 aerobic work can be effective, it's only useful up to a certain point, and the bottleneck for most athletes will be that they just don't have enough time to do enough of it. So we can stick in maybe 30 minutes, possibly 60 minutes or 90 minutes a week of that low intensity continuous work for most athletes, but beyond that, first of all, it's just going to be too boring for most of them, but also from a time commitment perspective, it's just going to be too much. We'll also tend to be getting enough aerobic or a lot of aerobic adaptations from training the sport itself. And a more efficient option, I think, here can be to use slightly longer aerobic intervals, maybe pushing 1 to 7 minutes at a slightly higher intensity, still maintaining that consistent output with some rest time in between. Second thing I've tweaked my approach on would be using more high intensity intervals with a lot of athletes and seeing good success from it. So the thing is, as you get more skilled and more efficient in your sport, you generally won't be spending as much time training at those higher heart rates, even during sparring rounds, as you would compared to when you're a beginner or fresh to the sport and not as efficient with your technique. So I think at that point, bringing in some more, alactic and glycolytic intervals can be a great way to keep pushing that top end conditioning. We don't need that much of it. I would generally stick more towards something that's easier to recover from, like an assault or a watt bike, as opposed to flat out sprinting. For the alactic work, we'd generally be looking at less than 10 seconds of max effort work with a longer rest of up to 60 seconds, only stopping when that peak power output from the first couple of rounds starts to drop by more than 10% or so. And for our lactate or more glycolytic focused work, that could range anywhere from 10 to 60 seconds, very high effort work with a work to rest ratio that varies anywhere from 1 to 1. So if you're doing 10 seconds work, that's 10 seconds rest, up to 1 to 4 or so. So if you're doing 10 seconds work, that's around 40 seconds of rest. And I would run that for anywhere from maybe 2 to 6 rounds.